Hello, welcome back. So today is another topic of change, and that is how do you show up for that change? And one of the things that is really important is to keep fit. Because if you don't keep fit, you may run out of energy before the change is done. And that has different reasons. For starters, you cannot really fall back on the structures that you have. And these structures are there in order to make sure that you don't lose the energy and that you can use it for something else. But when the structures aren't there, suddenly you're going to have to figure things out that you never had to figure out before. And that is where fear can come in handy, because fear is an energy that can motivate you during the change, but can also give you the energy before the change to get physically ready. Because if you think about the change and you are afraid, a lot of people are afraid of the change and that's why they never start. But if you transform that fear into something that makes you exercise, that is a really, really helpful thing. So let's take a look at change and why it can be energy draining, or why it may require a lot of energy. Now, one change that I did a long time ago was a change to go to Miami. And I moved to Miami. And one of the things that happened is, of course, I didn't speak the language properly, because English is not my mother language, right? So I went there, and there's a lot of stuff that I simply didn't understand. I mean, half the time I understood about half the sentences of what people said, partly because of the accent, but partly because I simply didn't have the vocabulary. And then I spent the next few sentences trying to figure out what the last sentence said, and then still keeping up to date. So it's a huge amount of stress that you go through. And that can happen in a change as well, because sometimes you need to learn new materials, and these materials have their own vocabulary, right? And then suddenly people around you are talking about stuff that you've never heard of. So there is a little bit of an adjustment there. But it's also that if you go into a change, suddenly everything is a little bit different. Like for me, I went in and I went to the bank, and suddenly they had these automated machines, and I didn't know them from home, and they wanted me to do stuff, and I didn't understand what they were doing. So at some point I realized, okay, I don't really understand this. So I went to the bank and I realized I was $200 in debt, and I thought I still had money. Turns out every time I had taken money out of the machine, I actually had an overdraft. I had told them I didn't want one, but turns out they gave me one anyway. So every time I got money out of the machine, I paid $25 of fine because of the overdraft, and I had completely missed that because I couldn't read the fine print either. Or another thing is, if you go to a hardware store, say you live in a, bad area initially because you don't make that much money, and then you have a problem with your window not shutting properly. So you go to the hardware store and buy something to whatever you need, right? But if you're in a different city, you don't know what the hardware stores are called, right? They are maybe called Comet or whatever, brand name they have. But you don't know these brands because you're not from that country. So you drive around aimlessly looking at brand names, hoping to figure out what is, right? And it says maybe, DIY. Well, you may not have the vocabulary to know that DIY means do it yourself. So there's all these different things. Then I had this car and I wanted to park it somewhere, and the parking meters were completely different. You had to put this stuff somewhere else, and I had to turn something. And then I had finally figured that out, and I couldn't get the key out of the car, out of the ignition. And I couldn't realize why that was happening. Why can't you get the key out of the ignition? In the end, 20 minutes later, because I was already late for an interview and I was standing in a bad area, I asked somebody who was a passerby to step into my car and get the key out of the ignition in a bad area, right? And turns out that in that particular brand of car, you have to push a button underneath the steering wheel in order to get the key out. I mean, why would you have to do that? Why would you have to push a button to get the key out? Right? I still don't get this, but there's all these little different things that can also happen to you in a change when you change over to a different type of system or a different type of doing things, where suddenly all these structures that you put in place don't fit anymore. And suddenly you have to do something a little bit different every time, and that takes energy. Now, how do you get that energy? Obviously, if you get physically fit, that is a really good idea. So exercise is a good idea, and it depends on what type of exercise you do. If you are already or have been fit when you were younger, for example, you can do exercise that at some point when you get into it and you do it daily, at least 4 or 5 times a week, you will actually not only work out your stress during that exercise, but you will also find that it makes you feel good. It makes you creative. It will turn all these blocks upside down, and suddenly you can think of things when you're jogging that you couldn't think before. And you feel better afterwards as well. It depends on what type of exercise is good for you. For other people, swimming is better. For other people, yoga is better. Some of these exercises will also incorporate some sort of shift in mindset and some sort of meditation, which is also really, really important that you're able to relax during the change. Because if you can't relax, at some point the body needs to relax, and you may take substances that will make you relax, which are not that healthy, even if they are legal, right? So there's a lot of things to think about before you go into the change to prepare yourself. And one tip that I want to give you, which was given to me at the time before I went into a major change, was if you are trying to lose weight and have been trying to lose weight for a long time, and you are exercising and you are being active and you think you're eating the right stuff, take a look at the alkalinity in your body. And that is a tip I got initially from Tony Robbins, actually, in one of his seminars. And I didn't realize why I hadn't been able to lose weight. And I was just piling on weight, piling on weight, piling on weight. And there seemed nothing I could do. I got that tip from him. And within 2.5 months, or I think it was 2 months, I lost 42 pounds. And that made a huge difference in the way I felt about myself, in my energy levels, and in all kinds of things. So take a look at what you can do today. Make a plan. And if you're already in your change, use the fear that change produces a lot of times to motivate you to work out. And I still do that now. Sometimes when change is really, really stressful, I just go jogging on the beach. That's why I was jogging on the beach yesterday. I do that almost every day. Sometimes I do yoga, sometimes I do meditation. I find that the most successful people are also mostly pretty fit. And when I used to work in companies that were at the top of the world, basically, the top people a lot of times were pretty fit. In some countries they aren't as much as in others, but the ones who were promoted were a lot of times really fit because they had to be in the office 16 hours a day, which means they had to have the body who can actually sustain this without getting sick. So take a look at your change, right? And if you can find some sort of exercise, some sort of team sport, for example, that you actually really enjoy doing, you will have an additional social motivation as well, and a social outlet as well. So you can have win-win situations in that situation as well. So this is it for today, and see you again tomorrow.